So we're starting to record. This is another of the Back to the Salle sessions that Aaron Bellarino has been running. My name is Aaron Beattie. I'm a scholar at Guelph, and we're fortunate to have free scholar Salle Recruit with us here today as well. And we've got to the point today, it's June 7th, where we're about to go through the continue where we left off last week and looking at the armored plays. In these recruit sessions, these are more of a top-down discussion than the back and forth that we have in the scholar sessions on Wednesdays. So we'll look at each one. We'll ask Kel for his thoughts from his time that he spent in Armour, and then we'll answer any comments or questions. But it'll be more stating information than having a debate.
Yeah, but we want people to ask questions. Don't feel shy at all. If it's something you're curious about, or why does this work, or why does that work, or what do you mean by that, Cal? Because sometimes I ramble.
So I'll go at the pace that you'd like for reviewing the first section, first set of material here, Cal. So here we have, after the posta, the first thing that we see after the posta is coming out from true cross across the line in order to cover against a cut or a thrust. And then we see the finishing action, which I see as similar to the exchange of thrust, coming in to put the point into a vulnerable spot, such as an armpit or a throat or a hip. And then another action that you can do after the cover is lifting up the visor and stabbing in the face. Any comments on these before we move on, Cal?
Well, the first play of the sword in two hands in armor is a relatively complicated movement from true cross. From bastard cross is very simple because you're already forward. The cover is exactly the same for both. So you end up swiping your blade and your left hand from low on the left across to high on the right. And that excludes whatever attack has come at you, be it a thrust or a cut. In this particular case, it looks like he's receiving a cut, and he's driving it aside. From true cross, which is, of course, a refused position on the left, you make a small movement of your forward foot, which would be your right foot, a little bit off the line, and that creates a new pivot point. And that pivot point makes a new center on your left and the attacker's right. So it makes it that much easier to avoid the attack coming at you, which, if it's with a poleaxe or something, is a pretty substantial weighted attack. It allows you to get a little bit off the line. And then, of course, you make a low sweeping pass forward to create the cover. So the energy of the cover and deflection is really substantial because it's a passing stab in armor. And when you make contact with the other braced against your sword, it sweeps them aside pretty effectively. It's a giant windshield wiper effect. So this also puts your point online. In this particular image from the Getty, it looks like he's got his thumbs pointed in, which is not the normal thing for true cross, but it is the normal thing for bastard cross. It gives you a lot more leverage. It doesn't give you as good a point control, however. So it's a lot easier once you see it done than to talk your way through it. But it is a key play in Fiore's covers that isn't really shown in any of the German manuscript styles. Theirs are much more forward, always forward, hardly ever refused. Whereas this refused position is a very large provocation to attack in a particular way. So you're shutting down some obvious lines, and the person attacking you is unlikely to deviate from the option you've offered them, because you got to make it look good. You got to make it look like an attractive option to attack you. I mean, you're both in armor, so Gotta get some advantage wherever you can. Any questions about that one, or should we go over the whole thing again?
I don't mean to interrupt, but is the stream glitching out for anyone else? It's like just been stuck on the loading screen for me.
Not over here, no.
Okay.
No.
Let me try to restart Discord. I'll be right back.
Yeah, I've had problems with Discord.
Oh, no, it just loaded. Thank you.
Yeah, it does this thing when you start it up. It takes like 2-3 minutes of spinning to decide that it's going to work the way it did last week, type of thing. It's a little bit annoying, but once it gets going, this has proven to be a very good platform for us to have these discussions. We're fortunate to have access to it.
I have one.
Anyways, as far as the play goes, any questions? Any clarification?
Yes, actually.
Go.
So the 3 images are intended to be a sequence of events throughout the first play?
Not necessarily a sequence, but opportunities that play out of the first cover.
Okay, so it's options as opposed to this is going to happen this way every time.
No, it's not sequential.
Yes. Okay.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I have a question as well.
Good.
So you say refused in True Cross, and then you step to your left with your right foot.
Aaron, could you take us back to the postus of True Cross, please?
1 second.
It's useful. I'm sorry, I don't know who I'm speaking with, but it's useful to review the postus so that you can see the starting point. There's Bastard Cross.
It's Graham, by the way.
Okay, Graham. Okay. Back to the guards. And True Cross. Vera Croce. La Posta Vera Croce. Okay, there we go. Oh, yeah, there you go. There it is. So this is a position held on the right, or I'm sorry, on the left, and it's a refused position. There it is. And as you see, he's looking over his right shoulder. This creates a provocation to whoever's, up and facing him, whatever the Zugadori we like to call him. So it cuts the options down where he's not going to try to be tricky and find an opening where there's already a secure cover. He's going to try to attack the head and right shoulder because that's what's given to him. And by eliminating some of the other options, you can be more secure in your cover. You can be more committed to it. True Cross is a very, and in the Fiore community, it's extremely well known and understood. Outside of the Fiore community, it really confuses people because not sure what you're trying to do, and they'll try to edge closer and closer to you before they launch their attack, which of course shortens the amount of energy they have tremendously. Now, in this position, to make the first play, and I'll go through it step by step again, you will move your forward foot, which is the right foot, a little bit off the line, which is just a bit left, like half a foot forward, half a foot to the side. And that creates a new pivot point. If you pivoted straight from here, and you can do it, you end up more on the line of attack. If you get yourself just that little bit off the line of attack, when you make your passing step forward, your right leg and the whole right side of your body comes forward. In this particular case, it's best to bring your body low with a wide stance. And that brings the sword up in front of your face that much quicker because you're sinking your body and raising your arms at the same time, which increases the speed of the cover to your head, which is going to be the target normally. Someone's going to try and whale you in the head and to stun you and then try and stab you or throw you on the ground. That's pretty much the purpose of this fighting in armor. In this case, when you've gone low and passed forward, you've got a tremendous amount of energy because it's not only you doing the pass, but all the equipment you're wearing, which could be a third of your body weight or more, depending on how heavy you are. I mean, if you're my size, it's like a quarter of your body weight. But either way, it gives you added inertia. And when you make your cover, it's very resounding. And you don't just stop there in a high cross. Your continuous movement of swiping from left to right will take their blade or weapon or whatever off the line. This is universal with sword in one hand, and it also is opposed to in poleaxe. Play is exactly the same. And when you've done this, it brings your point forward. Now you'll notice in this particular position, he's got his hand what looks like thumbs in, but if you look at it really carefully, he's got his backhand relaxed. And when it comes forward, if your thumb is pointed, if both of your thumbs are pointing forward, you have much better point control. And if both your thumbs are pointed in, you have much better leverage. So if you're going to have to pry somebody or move them around or shove them, having your thumbs in engages your arms and shoulders in an equal and supportive way. Whereas having your left hand forward disengages your shoulder from its strength, but gives it much greater dexterity and accuracy. And it's a simple thing that you can prove to yourself without any weapons or whatever. Just point your right hand with the palm down at something, and you can point effectively and touch things. Now turn your hand over so that your palm is up and try to do the same thing. You're as clumsy as a drunk. It's just the mechanical linkage issue. And this is physiology. Okay, does that help with your question?
Yes, thanks.
You're welcome.
And then from this action here, we can come down to this spot here and then give a thrust.
Yeah, that's the conclusion of the cover. So the first scholar is showing the thrust. Oddly enough, he's showing it into what looks like the breastplate, but actually it's the right armpit.
This leads us into the next play, where one of your options is to lift the visor and stab them in the face.
It's an option necessitated by the fact that you couldn't get through his armor. His frontal armor was solid, or you couldn't get at the armpit. So, hook up his visor and give him a jab. It's pretty straightforward. In the poleaxe section, there's an additional play to that, which is even more fun. We'll get to that in a week or two.
Here we have the familiar elbow push.
And the reason for the elbow push in this case is his armor's so good in the front, and he protected his face so well that you can't get at him. So turning him around to check out whether his armor is as strong in the back, and it's very unlikely to be in this period. Solid breastplates were not yet a thing. Within 10 years, they began to be developed, but at this point in time, they weren't a thing. So there was almost always somewhere to get a point in. And in a lot of cases, people would wear a breastplate and a male shirt and have some quilting on their back, simply for convenience or because they felt very comfortable fighting that way. Certainly, for the longest time, Brian McElmoyle and myself have only worn single breastplates over male because we don't get attacked from behind very often. I mean, we don't fight in melees or anything, so it's not a big problem. But when you turn somebody around, story's done. It's all done.
Would you say that this play and the play before it are a pretty good sign that Fiore was talking about the battlefield as well as duels?
Oh, absolutely.
Because I feel like that would be inappropriate.
In a duel, yes, no problem.
Yeah.
Any of this kind of stuff. On the battlefield, yeah, for sure. Especially in the age that Fiore lived and worked. The idea of what we think of as medieval chivalry is very much a Victorian anachronism that was really invented by poets and writers in the 19th century. They put an awful lot of misconceptions into the modern mind, and it's carried on in popular fiction. In certain types of tournaments, attacking from behind was a really bad news. King Rennie's rule book, rules for the tournament in the 15th century. There's a specific line that says, "And if you attack from behind, you shall not win the prize." In open field combat, yeah, no problem. Now, in civil disturbances, it's unlikely you're going to have time to put all your armor and stuff on, unless there's a riot happening outside of your quarter of the city type of thing, and then everybody that has good equipment is going to put on what they have, because you want to be as intimidating as possible when you go out and meet the butchers and the bakers with you know their brooms and pitchforks and whatever else that they're rioting about, and that was a common enough thing in an Italian city, especially northern Italian cities. Uh, was it 1380s? The textile workers rose up in revolt and had literally had to be crushed and then bought off because they kept rising up again because they were complaining about wages. The wages hadn't risen as much as inflation had risen in that period after the Black Death. A whole generation after the Black Death, a lot of people were still working for the same money that their fathers and grandfathers had worked for, and they'd had enough because everything was much more expensive. So this is also a very interesting thing about Fiore's supposed patron, the Marquis de Ferrara. As about a 12-year-old boy, his father's house, which was a fortified villa type of thing, not a big castle, in the middle of Ferrara, was attacked by a mob. The mob was angry over, excess taxation because the Estes tax collector had been double dipping and was really screwing people. And they had, literally torches and pitchforks and whatnot outside of the building, and they locked themselves up. And people outside chanted for, they wanted retribution. And finally, Nicolas II d'Este took this particular tax collector and shoved him out the door and closed the door behind him. And the mob consequently tore this guy apart. But everybody's watching from the windows in the guard loop, so they knew who the ringleaders were. And over the next few days, the Ferrara's boys, his dons, as it were, rounded up these people and punished them. Most of them by either having their nose cut off or being hung or having something really horrible done to them, like arms broken and things like that, because they didn't want to kill them outright. They don't want to hang them. Some of them were hung, depending on the situation. There's a really great book by Trevor Dean about this, and it proves that these guys were the mafia that we think of today, the Sicilian mafia. This is just the way the Italian nobles were in this period. So if you were in a civil disturbance, you want to put your kid on if you had time, because you never knew where the rocks and the javelins and the arrows would come from, or someone hurling a pot at you from behind, or maybe grabbing a spear from one of the guards and throwing it at you. Well, you need to have your kid on. In any case, I ramble. Sorry, let's get going.
Here we have a strong lower key. So strong that the helmet has been thrown off.
Yeah. Chiava Forteza from the dagger section. And this particular strong lower key it appears throughout in dagger and sword, two hands, in the armor section, and also in the poleaxe section. One of the things that you can do from middle iron gate with the sword in two hands in armor is put your point up into the elbow. If the guy's hands are reversed like this, you won't end up with a strong lower key. You'll end up with a middle key. So you're going to insert your point into the box uh, above the elbow and below the hand, and you're going to wrench that arm around in a middle key. Sorry, it's pretty nasty, pretty nasty stuff. This is a no fun at all, but it's not horrifically painful. Whereas a middle key in Armour is horrifically painful because your shoulder can dislocate it. An arm can only go so far in articulated arm harness. If the paw lanes are all articulated and linked together, it can't be hyperextended, but the shoulder can be dislocated. Good,
So
clean fun, eh?
the concept of using the box is something we haven't been doing at Emma Guelph until now. If you don't mind, I'd like to divert over to High Serpent just for a second to look at the concept of the box.
Okay.
The idea of a box from the 4 points of the left wrist, the right elbow, and the left elbow. And Kel, correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the concepts is I can take my point into the wrist or the elbow, or my pommel into the wrist or the other elbow, and
Yes.
either strip that hand off of the sword or start a lower key or a middle key, depending on whether I'm coming over or coming under.
Or if you, yeah, it depends how you come into it. If you can happen to get into somebody that has their arms up, hand high, elbow low position, and you put your pommel into the right, well, or the left for that matter. You put it into the left, he can just let go and get out of it. But if somebody is a habit of monkey gripping their sword, and there are people that do it, then you can use this against them to create an upper key and throw them backwards. You won't. It's unlikely you'll be able to dislocate the shoulder because they can move their feet. But if you can get your point in here, you bring your point down inside, say on the right elbow, and lever it against the right wrist. There's just no way out of it. You can very quickly dislocate the right shoulder. It's not hard with the lever of a yard of hard steel. It is effectively a crowbar at that. That's one of the reasons you cannot practice Armour with a fetter. They're too floppy. For that matter, they're too floppy for those things. But whatever. Different type of fighting. All right. The box can be up or down, and more often the box will be down. The hands will be down, the elbows will be high. And if you do from that position, as he says in middle iron gate, if you thrust into him from that position, you can drop your left hand off your pommel and regain the point of the sword past his elbow and crank it really hard, and use your middle key.
Which is similar to doubling up in wrestling.
Yep, exactly. So it's just you've got a much bigger lever.
So this will be something that we'll be training in Emma Guelph going forward.
It's good, clean fun. Trust me. Any questions? All
Moving
right.
on. Here we see completion of a strong lower key. This is similar to the play where I believe it's in the dagger section where he says, I can write a novel on your back.
In this case, he says I can write a letter on your back, and you can't do anything about it.
Is this taking away his happy time? Or is that another play?
I'm not sure, but I know that in the Getty text here, he says that I can write a letter on your back, and you can't do anything about it. And you'll have a poor deal or something. Something like he uses the idea of a poor deal, bad bargain quite frequently throughout the manuscript. I guess it must have been a common saying. Like we say, well, that sucks. And being put in that position, it does suck.
So here, after a thrust or after a cover, then being able to increase the front foot and put the point to the side. And instead of pinching with your forearm and your upper arm like you do with the clothesline throw in the dagger section, you're pinching with the tip of the blade end of the forearm.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a play that follows on from placing a point and not connecting. Say you missed or you misjudged the distance a little bit and you ended up too close because perhaps they stepped too close or you made your passing step too large. You'll end up with your point past the head or the face. So this is a way to recover from that with a very small increasing step with your increasing foot movement, not a step so much. With your left leg, which is forward. Of course, you want to get behind their right leg, and then you just hook them over, throw them over your thigh, basically. You don't want to get into the knee harness. You want to have your knee forward into the back of their knee. That way, the fans on the paulanes, which is the knee cop thing, the fans on the paulane won't link up with yours and drag you both down. If you do this incorrectly, and end up beside their foot instead of behind it, chances of you going down with them is very high, and it's very painful to be dragged down by your knee harness.
What footwork would you use to finish this play, Cal?
Una crasera. After you've hooked them up,
Yeah.
Oh, you just do a volta stabile to your left. That's all.
Yeah.
You don't have to move your feet again. From this point, when you hook them up, especially if they have a helmet on, their center of balance is so high in the throat that it's pretty easy to lift them and throw them backwards onto. And they're going to land literally on both shoulders and the back of their head. And this is also possibly why one of the reasons that the Italian Armet, a very close-fitting helmet that you see in the Getty for the first time and then throughout the Pizzeni Dossi, because it was very popular for about 40, 50 years in northern Italy. It's very close fitting and it's very hard to stab into compared to a bassinet with its male aventail. But the problem is the way the neck is conformed very tightly to your spine. If you hit the back of your head and your shoulder armor, there's quite a gap for your neck to get hyperextended. And the helmet doesn't have enough connection to the breastplate and what to really support it. So what they started to do very quickly within the first 10 years of the Armet style becoming popular was to put a little disc on the back with a post on it. And that not only protected the strap that kept the armet closed and held the wrapper up. The wrapper is sort of a little plow in the front to protect his throat. It's a double layer to protect his throat. It protected the strap from being cut off. But as some equestrian people, the jousting people, have since found, when you take a bad fall from a horse in an armet, even a close home, there's some support for your neck. And it's a very interesting thing, Leslie. If it hadn't been discovered through experimentation, none of us would have really understood, because it looks like a little satellite dish on the back of your neck, and they were prevalent throughout the early 15th century. So they really do serve a purpose. As we jokingly say, it gives you 5G coverage right in your helmet, but it's really more to protect your neck and the strap that holds the wrapper up, which of course protects your throat from lances and interesting stuff.
Oh, that's cool, because Murph's old helmet had one of those, and I always wondered what it was.
Yeah, most people, Armour specifically said, well, obviously it's there to protect the strap for the wrapper, but the chances of someone cutting that strap are so slim compared to the amount of times people fall off horses. It's frightening how many important members of the nobility throughout medieval history across Western Europe died from falling off their horses, like broken necks. Very, very common stuff. So one of the, I think it was a Belgian jouster, Fred, was the one that discovered that because he had taken a couple of bad falls. He wore the Roses period armor in the French style, and they didn't have the little disc on the back. And then there's no real name for it that I'm aware of. It's a disc on a post, and they're not particularly strong, but it's just enough to give a little bridge to the space between the back of your head and your pauldrons, which stick out quite a bit from your shoulder blades. So there's this big gap where your whole neck can get hyperextended into that little post will save you from. And if it breaks off, oh well, you're not dead. You get another one put on. Pretty cool stuff.
Oh, sorry, I do have a question before we go to the next one.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, lots of questions tonight. So can you just elucidate which sword is on top? Because it looks like they're both kind of overlapping just with the with how it's drawn.
This play? This here?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oddly enough, it works either way. Doesn't matter.
Oh, okay.
If you have your left vambrace on top of their sword, it doesn't matter whether your sword's underneath or over top. You can still lift them up by the chin. Because you're basically scissoring the jawline.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, great. Don't be shy about asking questions. That's what we're doing. Like, we're trying to get you to keep you interested and help you figure out stuff that you puzzle and look at and go, well, somebody else has already done that. Let's talk about it.
Here we have the good old crossguard stab to the eye. Or to the temple.
No, it's in the eye. The temple's covered by the helmet.
He's also pushing the armor side there.
Yeah, he is. But even with the arm in the way, you can lever the guard forward, like using his left arm as a pivot or a fulcrum. Yeah. And a very, very common type of helmet in this period is these are called, in English, we call them salettes, but in Italian, they're celata. And there were all kinds of different varieties of them. And they had a little sort of a brim around the back, and some of them had visors, a real short, like a baseball cap visor type of thing built right into them. Were super popular infantry helmets. And in quite a few cases, it was a helmet you would run into in open field combat quite a bit, especially if it were somebody defending, a fixed position or whatever. They weren't on horseback. On horseback, they'd have an armette, something with a good solid visor, really well, because you got to deal with lances, and lances in this period are horrific. They're not quite as bad as they become in the mid 16th century. Lances got up to about 30, 40 pounds of weight and 16, 17 feet long, 3 foot of it out behind your elbow and the other 14 feet out in front of you. That's not funny to be hit with by somebody wearing full armor on a fully armored large horse moving at a good clip. Not at a gallop, mind you, but at a good forward clip. You get practically a ton of steel concentrating onto less than, like maybe as much as a centimeter across on the tip of the spear. That's a lot of force, and you don't want to get hit in the face with that. Whereas wearing an open face visor like this in general circumstances where you're, riding around on patrol or going scavenging, food, or going to put down some, robbers that are hiding in the woods and causing all kinds of trouble for trade. Wearing full armor in situations like that is going to be really a giant nuisance because of the lack of visibility and breath that you have to tolerate in a high risk situation. Whereas, good quality sword skills and horsemanship will keep most things out of your face, and therefore you'll have, an open visor like a modern soldier has. The helmets are actually quite a bit like modern combat helmets that, the Americans used, the Germans used in World War One and Two. It's a very similar sort of design to the Italian Chelata. But, if you want to see a huge variety, there's a website called 14th Century Armor, and 14 is in Roman numerals, XIV Armor. And there's this huge book that the fellow that runs it has continually updated over the last 7 or 8 years. And all of the armor, like the art, is all drawn together into this wonderful resource, and it's freely available. You just go there, download it, and enjoy it for days.
Similar to play to the last one is now the pommel strike. So you're stepping with the right foot and coming in with the pommel or the cross guard against the face.
So is this the 8th play? Or the 8th scholar? I just got confused with the numbers.
Either the
Yes, it is.
It's the 8th scholar, so 9th play. Yes.
Can we look at the text as well, or are we just going to look at the pictures?
Yeah. Let's look at the text. Sure. I think we're reviewing is the idea here.
I think we got up to the 7th scholar last time.
Is that right? Oh, great. I'm glad somebody's keeping track of it, because my
So
memory's too short.
34 VB is where we got to last time.
Yeah, let's do the text. Absolutely.
So here we have the image. Then looking at the text. Alex, if you'd like to read the text, please.
As you see that the student before me strikes the opponent to the face with the hilt, then he can quickly strike him in the face with the pommel, as you see below.
Vice versa. Can go in either order. Pommel to the face is no joke. It's just no joke. Being stabbed in the face is, kind of fight ending, but being pommeled in the face is horrific. Yeah, I took Brian clean off his feet one time, and I actually opened my wrist up so that I wouldn't hit him quite as hard. The cover didn't work for him, and he ended up in a position very much like this. So I struck him on the left temple, and it dropped him like a stone. And I can't imagine actually hitting him with my arm lined up and completely, like a punch with your knuckles in line type of thing. Oh man, it's so much energy. Yes, he was not pleased.
Any questions on this one?
This is stuff that you're beginning to see in TV and movie fight choreography. People are starting to include more than just hacky, bashy with the blades. They're doing more with the pommel and hooking people with the cross and so on, because fight directors are beginning to pay more attention to HEMA-related, techniques. They can only do so much because this stuff is designed to kill. And they have to be able to do it over and over again safely without, losing stuntmen day by day. But it's pretty cool. I saw something like this not too far off from it. A lot of half sorting and whatnot in a fairly popular show. It was called The Witcher. I mean, there was a lot of nonsense in the show, but Some of the fight scenes weren't too bad. They really weren't compared to a lot of the crap that goes on, like in Vikings or whatever.
It's interesting. Like I also read the Witcher books, and the author like goes into like very extensive detail about like the actual like motions of the feet and the hands of the
It
hero
does
and the
he.
opponents.
Well, that's interesting. I've never read the books. I did watch the show. I wasn't horrifically impressed with the storylines and whatnot, and Henry Cavill's far too pretty to be a rough old man. But the show itself was entertaining enough to keep me going on. And I'm a little bit more than average critical about most medieval fight stuff and whatnot, but um, yeah, there were some interesting things in there. It's interesting to hear that he gets into great detail about the movements. There's a fellow in Toronto by the name of Christian Cameron, and he's a retired U.S. military fellow, and he writes historical fantasy novels, basically. And a lot of them, since he's taken up studying Fiore, a lot of them involve, you know, Northern Italian warfare and things like that, which is a whole set of things unto itself. But he apparently, I haven't read them, but I do know the fellow, and I hear people talk about it. He works what he understands about Fiore into his texts, and to me that's great because it's going to give people a much more realistic idea of how brutal and violent close quarters combat was in a period of wearing a significant armor. I mean, even today's military wearing their plate vest carriers and all the other stuff they have to cover on themselves with, and they wear like knee pads and elbow pads and whatnot, especially if they're parachuting. By comparison, that's really incredibly light armor, compared to what medieval people would wear to keep themselves alive against sharp weapons. Because in very rare occasions were they facing something with the force of a bullet. Large siege guns would tear apart a human being because they could tear walls down or break doors down. But a good heavy crossbow, which would be fired from a battlement or from inside a house, go clean through you. It's just amazing how much power those things have. But they're very slow to operate. People carry on about the English longbow being the great savior on the battlefield. Well, yeah, they were real effective, but they were used as combined arms. The chances of one single arrow taking out a man in good quality armor were extremely low. If you have 100 arrows being fired flat shot at him, well, there's a very good chance he's going to be taken out, not so much by armor being penetrated, but the thin parts of the armor, the sides, the backs, the edges of the helmet, the neck, the elbows, the knees, uh, the visor itself, which has lots of holes in it for obvious reasons. A longbow is going to do nasty stuff to that, but the concept of it, blasting through a breastplate, not so much, unless it's really poor quality. But hey, there's lots of other points to hit, and when you've got 10 or 15 arrows hitting you, it's like being kicked by a horse or being punched by 3 or 4 guys at the same time. Every arrow, blunt arrow, mind you, that I've ever absorbed in armor, just screwing around with friends. John Woods likes to take 9 millimeter shell casings and glue them, hot glue them onto arrow shafts, and they use those to shoot at each other. Those things hurt, and they're not even particularly strong bows. So, I mean, being struck by a whole bunch of longbow arrows or crossbow bolts is going to pound you as hard as being stabbed with a lance or whatever and absorbing that shock. That's not something you can just lightly, dust off. It takes a little bit of energy. As anybody that's done any sort of boxing or whatever, you don't want to get hit because it sucks up your juice too. You want to keep all your juice for dishing it out. In any case, I'm again getting way off path. Let's keep going here, Aaron. Please save me.
So that takes us from the pommel strike to the next action. I'm always tempted to guess what the next action is going to be, but here from the pommel strike, then we have a hook and a throw. Looking at the image first, we have wings on the hat. It's always fun to see the nice touches that they have on the art here. And then looking at the text, Andrew, if you would like to read the text this time, please.
Okay, the student who struck the opponent in the face with the pommel can do as I do. Step with your right foot behind the opponent's left, keep hold of his sword, and place it to his neck to throw him to the ground as I have done.
So as a follow-on action after the pommel strike, then we have a hook and a throw.
It can be a follow-on action, but it can also just play out from wrestling around. You're jangling around for position. You're trying to keep his point off of you, and he's trying to keep your point off of him. And at some point, at some times, one fellow will step in, say the wrong direction or perhaps just the right direction to be able to engage his pommel. The idea being that it's not just the blade and the tip of the sword that are offensive. The entire sword is offensive, as we learned early on. In this particular case, the juncture of your right wrist and the grip of the sword, as the pommel slips behind the head, and again, you create that scissor effect on the jawline or between the chin and the back of the neck, the base, the nape of the skull. Depending on the type of helmet the person has on, if they've got a Capellina, a small helmet, which is basically like a little, a lot like a bicycle helmet in terms of the amount of coverage. If they got a helmet like that and you slip your pommel behind, you're on their neck, and you throw them that way. Oh, it's horrific, horrific. And again, this is almost a leg trip. The throw is over your shin. Don't want to get your knee equipment, your paulanes, engage with his paulanes because both of you end up going down.
I'm a bit confused though. Doesn't the text say that you trip him with his sword?
Sorry?
Can you go to the text again real quick?
The student who struck the opponent in the face with the pommel can do as I do. Step with your right foot behind the opponent's left, keep hold of his sword, and place it to his neck to throw him to the ground as I've done.
Oh, as in like push his neck with his sword, basically.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so the image like shows right before you do the push.
Yeah. Okay, you see how the scholar has the band on his right leg. So that's how you know he's a scholar. He's also got the cool little winged hat. And he's got an asymmetrical pauldron, which is very, very unusual in this period. On his left shoulder, it's got a little hot guard on it. It's very, very unusual sort of thing in this period. He's got his blade over top of the middle of the blade to the strong of the Zugadori. So he's not only levering the sword, but he's got it trapped in such a way that he doesn't have to worry about it offending him. By pressing down on the sword and bringing the pommel behind the Zugadori's neck, it's a pretty easy throw. It's pretty much
Right.
an ankle throw.
Right, but the thing that you're bringing behind his neck is your pommel.
Yes.
Not just the text makes it seem like it's the opponent's.
Yeah, that translation's a little wonky.
Okay.
It is a little wonky.
Can you take a look at the second edition? Maybe they fixed it in the.
Yeah, the second edition is definitely better.
And plays the sword handle. Yeah, so I guess they make it more.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes more sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
And then the finish is a volta stabile to the right, similar to what we saw throwing with the point of sword to the other side.
Yeah. It's like throwing out a bag of garbage. Really, you just kind of toss it to your right. Yeah, if you pass with this, you actually take a lot of pressure off of the throw. So you're keeping your feet relatively stable, maybe shuffling your back foot a little bit forward. But generally, if you have a wide stance, you're going to have much more leverage. I've seen
And
so many people go down with this throw. It's unbelievable because they're so concentrated on trying to get the thrust in that they give up on grappling. And this is grappling with a giant lever. You had a question. Sorry, I interrupted you.
oh, it's okay. We spoke at the same time, I guess. Yeah. So in the picture, the scholar's sword is toward us, and the
Yes,
Zugador sword is behind.
is
But
under it.
yeah, yes. But it looks like the only way you could do that is by letting go of your sword at some point and wrapping it through. I I think, right? Because it looks like they're tied up in a knot almost.
They are tied up in a knot because in this particular case, the Zug was trying to get out of the last thing that happened, and he ends up in this position. They're not necessarily sequential. They can be sequential, but they're not necessarily. There are lots of opportunities to get into positions like this. If you push through with your pommel above his arm, it's really hard to control the point of his sword. If you get your right arm under his left arm, you can really control his sword because he can't apply the point. He hasn't got the leverage to direct the point forward. In this particular case, they're probably kind of wrestling almost as if they were, say, quarterstaff. They're wrestling at the middle of the cross. And it's a really terrible, useless place to be, but it happens. It happens a lot.
Yeah, so it's like if you get tangled up, try to throw.
Yeah. Anytime you could get either your sword tip, your punta, or your pommel forward near their head, trying to throw them is a good choice. Trying people, trip to the legs or they cut to the legs and stuff like that in all these stage fights. If you do that, you're going to fall over in armor. I mean, it's just nonsense. It's stuff you could get away with out of armor. But the idea that armored combatants cut each other in the legs instead of trying to throw each other down by, affecting the upper body or dragging with the arms. One of the nicer ways to drag someone to the ground, if you let go of the tip of your sword, the point of your sword with your left hand, and grab whatever mail is loose on your opponent, you can pull them to the ground just like like pulling someone's pants down on a schoolyard type of thing. It's really that simple. And there's a play in the Polak section where the scholar grabs the Zug by the visor of the helmet and throws him on the ground. And I'll tell you, it is the coolest thing to do that to somebody. They never let it happen again.
That's great. Could this be done with your sword, with the scholar's sword underneath, without
To the
having
head,
to let go with anything?
to the head.
Sorry.
No, it's a good question, and you're right.
Yeah, because he said he can do it from the previous play. Could also do this, and I assume that would mean not getting tangled up.
That's right. If
Cool.
you put your pommel under his arm and instead of trying to go around his head, just take his elbow, you'll throw him just as well. And that's playing inside the box.
Cool.
Well,
Awesome. Thank you very much. That elucidated a lot of incorrect notes I had.
it's good, clean fun. Everybody that we work with, all the scholars that we work with as they're coming up in armor, the first few times they end up playing with the box, it's like a whole new realm of Brazari they never considered, because the sword or whatever is a tremendous lever, and adding leverage to skills that you already have it's a joyful moment.
And this foreshadows the fun to be had with the pole axes when we use them to hook as well.
Yeah, I'd like to come and do another poleaxe thing with you guys. You guys seem to enjoy it when I did it a couple of years ago.
That would be great.
Well, soon we'll be able to travel again.
Hey.
Yes, please.
Yeah, my brother lives in Kitchener, so once we get the lockdown over with, I could come up just to get away from this horrid little town I'm stuck in, and come up and play. And I'm hoping to go and visit the London group to see what they're up to. But anyways, let's continue with this. We're trying to play with the material instead of tell stories.
So this was the play we were just at. We were here, so now
Right.
we're on to what's the 9th. And then looking at the text. Graham, would you like to read the text for this one?
Sure thing.
Go for
This
the
other,
second, go for the second edition, please.
yeah,
Thank you.
nice. This other play comes from the Posta de Vera Croce in this manner. When the student is in that guard and the opponent comes against him and attacks, the student passes offline and delivers a thrust to the opponent's face, as you see here.
So this is going directly high and then straight into the face. Not quite as high as a high serpent, but getting there.
Well, okay. Go back and read the text again.
This other play comes from the Posta de Vera Croce in this manner. When the student is in that guard and the opponent comes against him and attacks, the student passes offline and delivers a thrust to the opponent's face, as
Right.
you see here.
So if the attack is not some sort of fendente or thrust, but an approach forward, you can still come out of that guard. If you're in true cross and your attacker goes, I know true cross, you're not pulling that thing on me. You can still do true cross and use your vambrace to take the center of his sword. So your vambrace will be on the strong of the sword, and you can lever it down. You can also increase the height of your right hand on the grip and use this cover point where the forearm is on the Zugadori sword to create a fulcrum to bring that point down into his face. As it happens, a fighting convention we have in Armour and in the academy is that we do not thrust from short serpent into the face or neck. If you're going to put it at someone's throat or in the face, if you go from short serpent, chances are you're going to injure them very badly because the point will glide off of a breastplate or an arm or some sort of attempted cover and will tend to go up into the throat. None of us have really perfect throat protection. Certainly, we're not willing to take those risks because, outside of the pandemic, we need to go to work Monday morning. We don't need to walk into work with a neck bandage on and have to explain that all day. So the convention at Emma is exactly this: what the scholar is doing here to lift your right hand, your grip hand, lift your grip hand so that the thrust is going forward or down instead of up. Now, if you're thrusting to an armpit or groin or whatever, well, that's irrelevant. But only to the face and throat do we lift the backhand, and this is with all weapons, with the sword, the lance, and the poleaxe. We don't make lance attacks to the throat in Armour simply because somebody's going to get badly hurt. It's a really, really efficient and really dangerous fighting system. And even with the blunted and what we call rebated weapons that we practice with, chance of injury is very high. It's not an easy thing to play in Armour earnestly and not expect to get some injuries. But we'd like to mitigate the really obvious ones as best we can. The same thing with joint throws. when you do a joint throw, you don't want to complete it and dislocate somebody's arm or elbow or shoulder or whatever. You want to catch them off balance and presume they have enough control to realize game's up. If people try to hold on and fight it to the last second, that's where injuries occur. So in terms of training, this is a safety feature at Emma, but in terms of Fiore teaching us how to fight in earnest in a number of different circumstances, this particular case would be, they could be just playing because they've got open face visors, but they could also be, rival families in a city, an Italian city state that are trying to do in their rivals. It's pretty common stuff. The whole Hatfield McCoy, hillbilly battles that would go on for generations were a long, long tradition in Italy. The idea of vendetta. Somebody stabbed your cousin, so you're going to stab one of their cousins or one of their brothers. It's just to be expected. And as horrific as we might think of that today, that was common. It was the right thing to do. It was the honorable thing to do. We look down upon the Afghans or the Pakistanis with their so-called honor killings. Well, honor killings were a part of Northern European tradition, especially in Italy. Yeah, there's a bit of history, anyways.
Any comments or questions on this play, gentlemen?
Did Amber not join us tonight? I thought she was going to join us.
So that was the 11th play. Moving on to the 12th.
The Dave Savette Special. Dave Savette, 6'7" in his stocking feet. In armor, he's 7 foot tall. He loves to reach over your head and do this to your head. Loves it.
Mark, would you like to read this one?
Also, when the student has come into close play and sees that he can't harm the opponent with the sword, and resort to abrazare with the sword in this position. That is, the student should throw his sword around the opponent's neck and place his right foot behind the opponent's left, so as to throw him to the ground toward the right.
Thank you.
It works perfectly well in either direction. So if you happen to be on the right, right to right with your Zugadori, you can throw them with the pommel just as well. And you wrap the head around and throw them that way.
So this is similar to the clothesline throw that we saw in the dagger section.
I'm going to say no. Clothesline throw works on moving the chin. This works on moving the center of balance to one side or the other. Arguable though. It's just not a bad description.
Now, if you are actually taking, in this case, your left elbow into their throat and then squeezing with the forearm and the bicep, that would be different.
This is an open box.
Yeah.
The scholar's using an open box and he's levering against the back of the Zugadori's helmet to throw him over his calf or knee or whatever. You don't want to get so deep that you're on the thigh. It's really better done at the ankle or the calf. But no, this is not moving forward with your elbow to throw him. You literally use the sword to pull him forward or backwards. Like it's it's not a clothesline. It's pretty much the opposite direction of the clothesline. Wherever your hand, if in this particular case, the left gauntlet is against the guy's head, and you're going to throw him to the right, so you do a volta stabile to your right. If you were right side to right side instead of left side to left side, we'd use the cross or the pommel if it happened to be forward to hook him up and throw him over your right leg. So this is you don't get into the elbow. You stay at the wrist. You stay at distance because you're pinching it. You're scissoring on the back of his neck. You're not trying to get into his throat and whatnot. If you do that, you're bringing yourself much closer to him, and he can use his elbow to fend you off, his forward elbow. Yeah, it's just from experience, I can say that if you work this one, trying to get in and do a throw is going to put a lot of energy into your own shoulder joint, whereas doing it the way here with the gauntlet and a turn, the extended leverage gives you security in your joints and rips his balance to pieces very quickly. And is that clearer, or is that even more confusing?
No, that makes sense.
Okay.
Thank you. Any comments or questions from recruits or scholars?
Just one quick question. Oh, sorry.
I just so you mentioned reaching around. What about like whipping it, like breaking your grip on the sword and like kind of whipping it around? Would that be
absolutely? It's actually more common to do it that way, like putting your gauntlet onto his shoulder and then whipping your sword around and catching your sword. That's a better way to get into it than to try to lift it straight up and over. And the reason I was making a joke about Dave Savette, who is so tall and so strong, doing it so often, is that he can reach over your head without any effort at all. He can just bring his sword down over your head once he's got your point under control. There's nothing you can do about it because most normal humans can't reach up that high. And like it's a running joke with Dave and our buddies. It's like, oh, you puny humans. He's huge. In Armour, I weigh like 350 pounds. I was wrestling with him. I got a dagger out of his hand, and I thought, oh, I'm going to throw Dave. And the next thing I knew, the horizon was perpendicular in my visor lines, and then crunch, I landed in the grass. He literally picked me up and threw me like a sack of potatoes in Armour. I'm not a small man. Like I'm like 5'9" and I weigh about 240. So plus Armour, I'm almost 300 pounds with equipment and stuff. I just couldn't believe that he did that without taking a breath. Like literally just one moment to the next. Oh, I lost my dagger. We're going to throw Cal. It's really pretty wild how things can change so quickly in an armored fight.
Graham, you had a question?
Yes, I did. In the text that I have, it says the scholar should throw his sword to the neck of the player, and his right foot should go behind the Zugador. I think maybe this translation is just not good. Oh no, yeah, that says right behind the opponent's left, but in the image, it's his left foot behind the opponent's left. Is that just a textual error?
Yes, it is.
Great. Okay.
Tom Leone is an excellent translator. He is a professor. At this point, he is, anyways. Before he used to be an independent translator, he is now a professor of Italian Renaissance literature. He works somewhere on the New England coast. I'm not exactly sure where, but he's extremely well educated, and he's a terrific fencing scholar and teacher of Renaissance, late Renaissance fencing. Rapier and cloak and dagger and all that kind of stuff. he had a lot of trouble wrapping his head around any of the wrestling stuff. Any of the Abrazari stuff made no sense to him whatsoever. His first edition translations were, before they were published, were pretty heavily trashed by most of the Fiore community, who were not Italian language specialists. It's just like, no, that can't work. It's not possible. And he said, well, this is what the text says, and then he went back and retranscribed the actual text as opposed to using the transcription from some Italian guys from the late 90s, Rapasardio, I believe. Well, he's a super scholar, so he went back and he retranscribed it and then translated it again. Went, oh, okay, and then asked people in the community that had been doing it at that point for about 10 years. Said, well, how does this work and how does that work? And so his first translation was not bad, but his second translation is really quite approachable. It's not literal because, as Aldo Valente could tell you, there's no way to translate Italian accurately word for word into English. It just doesn't work. A Romance language doesn't work into a Germanic language, Germanic-based language that's taken other languages into the side alley and looted their pockets. This particular case, Tom got a lot better because he had lots of input put onto him. But still, he's trying to make an approachable, not word-for-word translation. And sometimes he gets things mixed up, That's why I really don't like to use the first edition translations for discussion, because the second ones are much better informed and much clearer. But even then, they're not dead accurate. Aldo Valente, our my fellow free scholar, translated all of the armor sections and all the armor weapon sections in 2007, 2008, and he translated them as literally as possible, even though they're really clunky to read. There's no question about who's doing what action. In both of Tom's translations, there's one or two plays where he's inverted the scholar and the Zugadori because he didn't follow the grammar. He didn't catch, or the grammar was bad to begin with. It's hard to say. But play doesn't make sense, and it's an armored play. It might be this one in particular. It's been a while since I looked at it. But it literally made no sense in the action of the play. The words didn't match what you need to do physically to make it happen. So, then again, the Getty's got something like, 12 or 15 major errors between the text and the illustrations. The worst of which is the seventh play of Abrazari. In the Getty, it's impossible. You physically can't do it the way the Getty is drawn. It's not possible. The way the Getty text works, it is. But the image is just wrong. Anyways, we're digressing. Let's keep going. Let's get some more done.
This does talk to the discussion that we have in the scholar sessions on Wednesdays, where we look across the 4 known manuscripts. And that allows us sometimes to see similarities or differences to gain more context.
Yeah. And you can do that on your own. This Wikipedia thing, Michael Chittister has laid out a whole online concordance type of thing. Unfortunately, there's quite a few really, really bad translations. Michael Chittis has tried to do some of his own translations, but they're heavily based on Colin Hatcher's. And Colin Hatcher is a Australian fellow living somewhere in the Central States. And man, he just doesn't get it. There's just so much wrong with his translation. You really need to stick to Tom's. Anyways, continuing.
So here we have the 12th scholar, and we see a fellow on the right with a very interesting, almost like a dragon skull on the helmet there. And he's placing the point of his sword to the right wrist of his Zigador. I will read the text. This student can't effectively strike the opponent, so he resorts to Abrazari. He places his sword to the inside of the opponent's right hand. Depicted here is the student as he is about to enter with his sword and left arm under the opponent's right arm in preparation for throwing him to the ground or in order to place him in the low key. The low bind, that is the strong key.
Chiave Forteza. This is work in the box. This right here tells you that Fiore understood working the box perfectly well. When you slip your punta in behind the grip wrist, if you happen to get your point in behind the cuff, the hourglass cuff, it's horrifically painful to whoever's receiving it. And this particular play is across the other types of armored combat, and so-called German styles. There are a number of 14th or late 14th, early 15th, and into the early 16th century in the Gladiatoria text in specific, where this play is there. So it's a really well distributed technique. It's not something that Fiore obviously made up on his own as his own genius. This is something that's pretty common. And having done this to people, when you shoot your point forward, even with a rebated sword, and catch the inside of their wrist and then start lifting. And this is a good spot where you want your thumbs pointed in because you've got much, much more leverage. So when you do this from bastard cross, for example, or plunge down from high serpent into this gap, and then turn the thing around. It's a voltage to be able to throw the guy, but it's really painful. So the right arm will come up. There's no sort of toughing it out. It just whoosh, your arm's gone. Sadly enough, most people don't think of the most obvious way to get out of it, which is simply letting go of the grip of the sword and regaining it. If this is being done to you and you don't want to suffer, let go of the grip of your sword. You've still got a hold of it by the mezzaspada, and then regain your grip. After the guy goes flying off because he's committed to throwing you to his right. So when you let go, he loses that tension and will accelerate in his turn. And when you regain the sword, you'll often have his left shoulder facing you. And getting behind someone in armor it's a happy dance moment or a Snoopy moment.
I have a question. Like,
Sure.
you're so in the image here, you've got the weak of your sword there in his wrist. I understand that it's like a painful position, but just in terms of leverage, will you, like, doing a volta stabile, will you be able to, like, actually force him to move, or like, is he going to get closer before doing that, like from this image?
No, you're gonna punch down with your right hand on the pommel or the grip of the sword. You're gonna punch that straight down towards the ground, and you're gonna lever your left side of your body up as high as you can. And if you can pull it slightly towards you, that's even better. You don't want to pull it to your hip, but if you can pull it towards your elbow, it makes his arm come up. If he holds on to the grip of his sword, you've created a scissor triangle against his inside of his wrist. A vambrace that goes forward just a little bit under an hourglass gauntlet will, stop the pain from happening. Does nothing at all to change the leverage of the situation. The fulcrum point is just inside the left hand, near the left thumb of the scholar. So look at that. There's your fulcrum point. And in the seesaw is everything to the right of that goes down, everything to the left of that comes up and a little bit towards your arm. Does that
Yep, that makes sense. Thank you.
visually? Okay.
Yep.
When you do that, it drags him over the center line. So more of his body will now be turned to his left and drags him over the center line. And it's something that's not really shown in Fiore's Abrazari, but it's common throughout all of their forms of wrestling, both Eastern and Western. In some of the Chinese systems, it's called heaven and earth, where you take one arm up and the other arm down to throw somebody off balance or to the ground. Um, in Greco-Roman wrestling, it's a very common technique, and in actually the seventh play of Abrazare, you're doing basically the same thing, but you're using your shoulder blades as the fulcrum point to hurl the person over. If you watch some of the videos, probably from like 2006 to 2008, because we did a lot less armored videos after 2008, because we weren't doing tournaments anymore. If you watch some of those videos, you will see this lever acted out or at least attempted in almost every sword on sword fight and quite a few of the poleaxe fights. There's, I don't know, 150 armored videos on YouTube, the Emma YouTube channel. They're, I'm not saying that we're experts at this or anyways, but, every once in a while we get the techniques to happen. It's all good.
This reminds me of a wrestling action we do at a McGuelph, where if you have two hands grabbing your head, you can push up underneath the one elbow and pull down with the other elbow for spear.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the heaven and earth concept.
Okay, cool.
I usually also add pressure points in when I'm teaching that particular technique. And nobody seems to like it. It's unpleasant.
Pain compliance comes to mind, eh?
Totally pain compliance, yeah. I could do a weekend seminar on pain compliance.
Any other questions on this play?
By the way, the questions are quite good tonight, really thoughtful. Thank you. Good stuff. It shows that you folks are, really interested in this material and you're trying to get a better grip on it. And it's very encouraging for those of us that have been, trying to share this material for 20 years. You're doing it. You're the second generation. You're going to be sharing it for us later on. Really happy about that.
One of the few positive things coming out of the COVID time is the ability to communicate across the different clubs and have access to this level of information. So coming out
we
and
could have done this before, but none of us could have been bothered. Now that it's our only opportunity, we're getting a lot of mileage out of it. It's good stuff.
moving on to the next play. Let's see. So we were here on the 12th. Now we're on to the 13th. So this one is our provost, the Emma Guelph provost, David Murphy. He always says this is just weird whenever he sees this. Highly unusual.
Yeah, well, he's a little bit smaller than the average person, so that's why he has a little trouble with it. I've done this play many times to people that I think are strong. Like David Ito is much smaller than I am, but I think he's way stronger than I am. He's so fit. And I've done this exact play to him and yanked him right down. The trick of it here is that he's showing the thrust to the face. You're setting up a static position by grabbing that other wrist under his elbow. If you stay there too long without a threat, you're going to get your own elbow levered. In armor, there's only so far it can go, but if your arm harness is mail, you can get your elbow dislocated. This particular play, though, is not that hard to get into. You do need fast hands, but you need fast hands for all the dagger covers. You need it for wrestling. Lo Tigro. This is the tiger right here. So this particular play is weird to the extent that the sort of stuff that goes on in the middle of a tangle, where the two of you are at half sword and jangling and tangling about. A lot of times, someone will make a wind up or sidestep or try a technique on you that you can blow off with your forearm. And this allows an opportunity to make this step in. And just like every other entry in swordplay, you use the entire left side of your body to make the entry. So this would have happened from some jangling in the center where you got the opportunity to step around his point because his point's past you. Obviously, you can't do this if his point's in front of you. His point has to miss you. It has to glide off of you. It has to be deflected off of you so that the point is no longer a direct threat and you can enter into a close grapple very quickly. If you do this and grab the wrist and just pull down, like literally pull it towards your left hip, um, all the things that you can do here with the point, pommel. I mean, you could even give the guy a cocoa butt, your wee Glasgow kiss with the top of your helmet. If he's got an open visor and you slam the brow of your helmet into him, you're hitting him with one of the heaviest pieces of armor you're wearing. The front plates of any helmet are always going to be the thickest of the helmet. And in many cases, those frontal plates were on par with the thickness of the breastplate in its thickest part. So, it's a whole, that's you're wearing a club on your head. It's a pretty substantial blow against an open face. But in this particular case, he's got the point into his face, so that's even better. You can stick a point in somebody's visor or stick it into their face or their mail or whatever and just say, hey, are you done now? Or if it's somebody that you need to get rid of because there's four more behind him, this goes into his left eye, comes out, and you just keep moving. And the body won't even tangle you up. That would be a cool piece of choreography to see in some sort of TV show. I'd like that.
The Glasgow kiss makes me think of one of the things that we ask in the scholar test, which is which part of the sword can be used as a weapon? And of course, the answer is all of it.
Everything.
So then taking it to which part of your body or which part of armor can also be used as a weapon. the points that contact the opponent.
Exactly. Your elbows and vambraces are way stronger than your gauntlets. Like people get this crazy idea that they're going to punch each other with gauntlets. Gauntlets are designed to keep your fingers from being sliced off, and that's their entire purpose. It does not increase the quality of your punch. Like a 12-ounce boxing glove is going to do way more damage to an unprotected head than your gauntlet will ever do to any helmet or a person wearing it with a decent suspension system on. You can slam your elbow into that same helmet and drop somebody like a rock. It's pretty hard to knee somebody in armor effectively, but you can knee their legs and drop them. If you throw what most people consider a low, there's a particular word for it in Thai, but in Muay Thai, there's a low leg strike that is typically thrown to the outside. It's a knee to the outside of the thigh to beat up on the muscle in the cluster there. But if you throw it to the inside of the leg, you're going to cork that leg for 6 weeks. That leg's bruising and damage around the femoral artery will be so horrific that that person will have a hard time walking. Of course, they're going to have some armor there. There's a lot more armor on the outside of the leg. So if you can drift a knee, your Pauline or the upper part of the Pauline and cuisse combination, if you drift that into the inside of a thigh, you're going to drop the person wearing it and they're not going to walk well for a while. It's a pretty quick way to stop a fight. Sorry, that's practical stuff. Fury never talks about doing things like that.
Looking at the text, Alex, would you like to read the second edition text for this play, please?
This is a strong and effective grapple that enables the student to place his left foot behind the opponent's left foot and the point of his sword at the opponent's face. He can also throw the opponent to the ground toward the right.
So for the throw, I assume that would be a volta stabile to the right.
You got to drag with the arm, though. You got to lead with the arm. You can't just use your legs and hips because you're going to hyperextend your own arm. So basically, as I say, this works best if you grab the Zug's right wrist with your left arm and then kind of pull that whole combination of cross, right hand, everything sort of towards your hip. That will drag them to their left, of course, your right, and make it so much easier to make a throw over the calf. And remember, you're wearing enclosed greaves, which is the calf leg lower leg protection. You're wearing enclosed greaves, so it's not like something's going to pinch up against you. This is not going to touch you at all. You're someone would have to take a battle axe to your greave to really injure you, like to cut into it. They can sweep your feet from under you with a stick, but to actually injure you through a greave, which is a very light piece of armor but very tightly shaped, isn't going to happen. So throwing somebody against your greave is perfectly feasible.
Could you also hook with the pommel as to the left of their head to encourage them to go over to the right?
No, because then that brings your center of balance into theirs. You want that space open. You want an open landing zone there on your right.
Okay. Recruits and scholars, any comments or questions on this play?
Yeah, I'm still not sure to understand how you're going to avoid like hurting or overextending your arm. Like it seems like kind of a hard push.
This particular moment where the image is drawn is where he's been grasped, where the Zugadori has been grasped and his sword is no longer in control. If his elbow and upper arm are on top of your elbow, like the inside of your elbow, it's not an issue. Like he can't really hurt you. If you had turned your hand over so that the thumb was forward towards his hand, then you'd be at chance of putting yourself into an armbar of your own volition. Whereas in this case, you can't make an armbar on you because you can't turn your elbow up. So he can push down on it, but it's only going to collapse your arm and draw him forward towards your hip.
Well, even without any like reaction from him, I'm just like imagining like pushing a heavy person with nothing but because like a lot of the other like the grappling involves you using your body, or rather your hand supported by your body. Here, like your arm is like really out there.
Have you ever knocked anybody down by pushing through their hips, like in Iron Kate?
Yes.
Well, it's the same. In this case, as you pull the thing towards you, his body is going to come towards you, but his arm isn't going to come straight out. It's going to go into his hips, and his pommel is definitely going to be into his hips. So by pushing into his hips, you're breaking his column of balance. And because you've anchored the lower part of his collar of balance against your calf, he's going to go down like a ton of bricks.
Okay.
Well, in armor, remember again, in armor, your center of balance for a man goes from your sternum to your throat. So it's a lot higher pendulum. It's more easily cast over. Take a chance and do it. Like really, when you try it, even out of armor, this is not a hard play to do. But if you have a helmet on and try this play, you'd be shocked at how fast you go down, because it's unnatural for us to balance ourselves at a new center of balance. Like it's foreign. You have to practice at it. What we call helmet time. You have to have a lot of helmet time. There's a thing that I've often said to people that I'm training over the years is that when I put my visor down, it's like a switch goes on. I settle into a wider stance. I put my head very upright. My posture is better than grandma would ever expected type of thing. And it's something that you become accustomed to. All the portraits of Christopher Colombo standing there, and he's got, his shoulders back and his hips forward and whatnot. Well, the man had worn armor several times. There's no question about it. Anybody that wears armor, complete armor, I should say, on a regular basis ends up standing exactly like that at rest because it balances all the weight up and down your spine. So you're not bent over. One of the worst things that most people find in the first few times they try armor is they get into a natural sort of crouch, which a wrestler out of armor takes. Oh, it's deadly in armor. Oh my God, it's terrible because all that extra weight is now on your neck and spine and your shoulder blades. It's exhausting. So most people that try armor for the first time, even just wearing mail and a helmet, will complain about their shoulder and neck hurting the next day. Absolutely. It's perfectly common. Anyways, that's not part of what we're teaching here, but, we teach you as a scholar at Emma.
And it ties into the wrestling and stance and walking curriculum. Earlier, we can get recruits to have a extremely vertical stance and lower center balance, and more precise footwork, the better.
Oh, yeah. I mean, breaking modern people from the normal slouch that we've all got, every one of us has, is so difficult. And it actually is a strange thing anymore because so many of us spend so much time behind screens or making presentations or whatever, not sitting in a comfortable chair discussing with other people or committee meetings or whatever, but crunched over a book or a notepad or computers are the real problem. And I know I do it too. I used to have terrific posture, and well, I think I've lost about half an inch over the years. It's just because we do not have good posture. If you were in equestrian culture, like you were in a culture where riding on horseback was a normal, if not daily, but regular thing, your posture would improve enormously because you simply can't ride a horse hunched over. The horse knows it and he'll throw your ass off. Those horses are not as stupid as they look. And your balance, your control of balance is not so good when your head is anywhere other than directly above your hips. It's a really good book on physiology that acquaintance of mine who has now got his master's in physiology from some university in Boston. Really good sword instructor too. But all of this kind of stuff, the linkages in your arm, the way your balance works, the way you can counteract your hips to make your shoulders snap, get more energy in your shoulders and your arms. All of this kind of stuff is the sort of stuff that teenagers knew in the Middle Ages because since they were little boys in the barracks with all the other little boys in a noble household, the older boys just knew more about not getting beat up, like how to keep their balance, because to learn this stuff was survival. The modern concept of, no roughhousing, no fooling around. Somebody might get their arm broken or get a bruise or whatever. That was just commonplace stuff. It was perfectly normal for someone to fall off a horse and get their arm or their leg broken and then have it sat and be, taken care of for 6 months or maybe sent back to their home family for that time because they were injured. It happened, but it wouldn't happen all the time. It wouldn't even be a common thing because the people that were more experienced were sure to pass on the lessons to avoid those injuries because you're not talking about some sort of faceless army where it's all recruits that have come from all over the place. You're talking about families, groups of extended families that would trade their children for training. They would be sent to a more powerful, a more educated, a more varied household to be raised so they could become part of a larger entity. The idea of hunting with all the guys that, well, in our modern terms, if we knew a whole bunch of guys that did what we did that all lived in one county, we would get together and we'd go hunting together. And we'd get together and do organized rides around the perimeter of our territory. because you want to get used to training with the people that you might have to depend on for your life. And this is a modern military concept as well, but it was a very common thing throughout the Middle Ages. And there's a fair amount of writing about this in the Anglo-Norman period, and definitely Angevin Norman period, the High Middle Ages, as it were, the end of the High Middle Ages. The idea of familia doesn't mean your immediate blood relatives. It means all the people that you work with and live with and have the neighboring properties. These are the people that you train with as children. These are the people that you train with and hunt with as teenagers and as men that have taken on responsibilities, either for land or some legal thing, or taken on I don't know, an oath to somebody that's much more powerful than you. Your job is to go and do this thing. You're my immediate family. Uh, the primus as they were called. So a great lord that had multiple lands would have a small familia around him that weren't necessarily blood relatives but trusted men, and the similarity to what we understand of the mob, the Cosa Nostra, is identical to the way Italians, especially, and French as well, nobility was formed and structured. So it's a really good lesson to learn a little bit about how the mob works, to understand how Italian nobility works. It wasn't all the sort of romantic, Gothic romance of the Victorian literature. It's very practical stuff. It's power struggle. You got a powerful family on one valley, and they decide they've had enough of being raided by the powerful family in the other valley, who is very poor. For example, they got poor pastors, so their peasants are poor, so they're going raiding to get more animals or whatever. Well, you got to deal with this stuff. This is everyday stuff. Or one city decides that a small city next to them needs to be part of their commune, their comunità. They go to war with them. They don't just go, like, you guys need to buy more from us. It's more like, you need a modern mafia thing, a joke on TV you'd see, is that you need to have us pick up your garbage. We got all the garbage trucks you can use. You shouldn't use anybody else's garbage trucks. That kind of stuff, that concept, medieval Italian. Anyways, enough. Let's carry on.
So just to add to that briefly, the context which is foreign to most of us is the idea of living and breathing violence every day in all contexts: murder, self-defense,
The
civilian conflict.
chance, the opportunity for violence was much higher in this period than it is today, in part because of the structure of society and the concept of prisons and whatnot. But they had a much more brutal legal system than we do. You didn't go to jail for 7 or 30 years or whatever. They hung you. And if it was any sort of treasonous thing, they hung you until you were almost dead. Then they dragged you down. They took your guts out and burned them in a fire. And then they chopped your body up into 4 parts and sent it to the 4 corners of the region to be stuck on walls as a symbol to show that you were a bad person and you did the wrong thing. And that would last for about a year and a half before the body parts rotted away. But they would often tar them so they'd last longer. Can you imagine something like that happen to, say, I don't know, what's that, Paul Bernardo, right? If he'd been in the general population in the Canadian prison system, he wouldn't be alive today. But in the Middle Ages, he wouldn't have been alive by the end of the day because the victims' families would have done him in. A very, very different world than we live in today.
So should we be reading Fiore in a mafia voice?
Yeah, it's not a bad plan. Except, leave out the cannolis because they hadn't been invented yet.
So it looks like we have two last plays. That'll take us just a little bit past 10 o'clock, and that'll get us through the sword and armor section.
Cool.
Graham, would you like to read this next one? Here we see our ever-friendly and ever-present elbow push.
And out of respect, I'll read it in my normal voice. This is the counter to the Remedy Master and all his students. As a rule, every counter performed against a Remedy Master also breaks the plays of that same Remedy Master's students, with the lance, axe, sword, abrazare, and the rest of the art. But back to the Remedy Master. This countermaster places his left hand behind the opponent's right elbow as the latter performs the parry of the Remedy Master. He then gives him a forceful turn so that he can strike him in the back, as we see next.
This is without doubt one of the chattiest segments in all of the Armour work. It's great because he goes into talking about, yeah, and you can do this and you can do that and that can be done and you can do this and it all works out throughout the system. It's a beautiful thing for those of us that get sick and tired of people saying, well, Fiore's all about dueling. No, it's not. Anyways, let's go with the play. This is such a classic and simple play that, even if someone has never worn armor before, they can do this play out of armor. It's so simple. Comments? Questions? Can we join hands and contact the living?
I like to think of
Classic elbow push.
the initial cutter thrust as being a provocation, and as your opponent comes out, in that instant in time in which their left elbow is ready, you push that left elbow and away you go.
Be an elbow push it right through the art. This particular play is a really good way to suck someone who is working with True Cross but doesn't really understand the timing of it yet. This is a particular play that's a lot of fun to do to somebody who has practiced something religiously and seriously, but only done it in one way. Has never played a little bit to the left and a little bit to the right, and a little bit short and a little bit long with their footwork. You can read somebody doing this and switch to it simply by dropping your left hand off the pommel and going to their elbow. In many, many ways, this is very much like the dagger play we like to call the fish, where you throw your attack and it's either a feint or you know that the guy's going to cover you, but the elbow's in the way. And this is why when you come out of True Cross, you need to be low. You see how much of this guy's head is exposed over his sword? Where in True Cross, or I say in the very first play of Sword and Armor, it says, and you take my body low from True Cross. If you can do the same thing in Bastard Cross, you just kind of sink a little bit on your knees. You need to drop your knees a little. But coming from True Cross, there's this huge amount of energy coming forward. If someone does that but doesn't get down behind their sword, this is an easy play to do. Very, very easy. So the countermaster here is counting on the scholar doing the thing poorly and predictably, or, not quite timing it right because his head's still in the way. So you can make a threat to the head and the Zugadori, in this case, will try to lift his hands. And when he lifts his hands, his elbow's exposed. It's perhaps not the easiest thing to visualize, but it's one of those moments of you look committed when you make your attack. And when the expected response comes from Veracroce, then you soften up your attack and attack the elbow with your offhand. So you've turned it from a clumsy fendente type strike or perhaps a high thrust into an opportunity to do some abbracciare at the sword. It's an elegant solution, but it does take it takes a lot of practice. It's very difficult to time. But once you push the elbow, they're done because all of their energy was going to their right. The Zugadori here in this case is trying to make the cover and windshield wiper to the right. Once you clip that elbow and shove it to your right, their left, it breaks the balance. So there's this center column, the elbow in particular, which is attached to the trunk of the body. So the center elbow is suddenly interrupted and shoved to its left by you. And the rest of the body's still going right. It's a messy, messy throw. Generally, the person who's doing it will fall down on their right side. So they're going to land on their right shoulder or their right arm. They very rarely go all the way to the left because you just push them with your arm. But the interruption of the energy coming out of Veracroce, it's I don't know how to describe it. It's like kicking out someone's knee or pushing somebody's hips. It really breaks them. Anyways, questions? Disbelief? This is so much fun for me to talk through this stuff with you guys. Honest to God, thank you all so much for showing up tonight to talk about this because I love this material and I don't get to work through it very often. And having anyone even interested in talking about it and asking questions is a huge joy for me. So thank you all.
And this is great for us. I'm taking notes, and I'll be
Sure.
putting these into notes for this. This will inform our training for a couple of years going ahead.
Well, I hope that within a couple of years I'll come visit you guys and help training. I'm
Well,
getting a little old for fighting, but I should certainly teach.
Well, if you don't come up here, we'll come down there. So one way or another, we'll make it work. I was wondering, Kel, if you'd like to do the honors and read the text for the 16th play.
Certainly. No. Okay. I'm the student of the Countermaster we just saw, and I finish his play. As soon as the opponent is turned, I immediately strike him in the back under his right arm. I can take my pick. I can hit him in the back of the head, from under the male coif, or in his buttocks, but with all due respect, and under the knees or anywhere else I see an opening. Yeah, spinning someone around from this position is not as common. Breaking their balance and interrupting their time is. Getting to this position is it's a very fortunate thing. Like it doesn't happen easily. It's interesting here that he's spun around someone who's entirely armored, because if this guy's as well armored as he is with the full visor and armat or bassinet, and he had his true cross or even bastard cross cover in place, he's going to be a hard guy to stab. So if you can manage to spin him, that's fabulous. So then you've got all these opportunities. I can only comment that this is a very low percentage gamble. The best you're going to get out of it, absolutely, is that you're no longer under attack and no longer under threat. But the opportunity to actually get at his back is not common. It's just not common.
Any comments or questions from the recruits or scholars before we finish up?
The Zugador is like still in High Serpent. He just got flipped.
No, he's not in High Serpent. He's just kind of spun.
Okay.
He was making a crossing, like the true crossing.
He's like, whoa.
And suddenly everything got turned around. The force that it would take to do this to somebody who had come out of True Cross is pretty spectacular. However, out of Bastard Cross, this is not a hard thing to get to because in Bastard Cross you're already forward, so you've really only got work like energy generation above your hip joints. There's not a lot that your legs can help with. They can lift you up and down, but they can't do a lot of the heavy turn that generates force. Grabbing somebody's elbow and using it as a lever will create the force you need to turn somebody around, especially if that person was concentrating on the thing that they thought they were going to do. And, well, that didn't work out for you, buckwheat, type of thing. So you've got a chance to get at their back. Certainly someone with slightly less armor would try to take the visibility and balance aspects of someone completely armored to gain advantage. If you can lever them out of the way, it's an awful lot better than trying to stab through them. Definitely getting at someone's back is going to give you a much better chance to get through their harness than it is from the front. Nobody's harness is solid in the back. It's impossible. You can't move.
Any other comments or questions by the recruits or scholars? In that case, I'd like to wrap things up for tonight. Thank you very much for coming out, and especially thank you to Kel for your context for these plays and for the armor and the history in general.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to say that those of you that have enjoyed Armour so far are going to enjoy it even more once we get into the poleaxe section. Poleaxe, in some communities of the HEMA or WMA world, is one of those deep, dark things that they'll never get to understand because they can't afford the right equipment to cover themselves. Frankly speaking, if you have a decent set of gauntlets and a decent helmet or head covering, a full armored helmet is not that heavy by itself. It makes you a little awkward, but if you were to put on mail and decent arm harness and a helmet, there's no reason that you can't practice polearm. You don't have to be fully armed from head to toe. In fact, none of the armor, and I'm on my 13th set of armor now, none of my armors have ever had full sollerets or sabatons. I don't like them. I don't care for them. I'm not worried about arrows being shot through my feet, so I don't wear them. But the rest of my armor is pretty complete. If you want to learn this stuff and all you have is decent arm harness and a helmet and a mail shirt, there is no reason you can't practice this, including poleaxe. If you don't have a decent helmet, you really shouldn't practice poleaxe. A fencing mask is barely adequate for a sword in one hand or a sword in two hands. It's okay with a sword in both hands doing armored plays like a half sword. But yeah, poleaxe, now you got to have a helmet because your brain is just not going to survive inside your skull if you accidentally get hit with even one of the rubber poleaxes we use. There's some incredibly lightweight ones on the market that are literally toys, like Mattel toys, that you shouldn't use because they do not replicate what a poleaxe feels like. You see people jumping around like rabbits playing with pole axes in, like hockey or rugby equipment or not rugby equipment. What's that stuff called? Lacrosse equipment, and they're jumping around trying to play at plays, but they have no weight on them. They're playing with weapons that are maybe a quarter of the weight and balance of a real weapon. It's not realistic to try to reconstruct these techniques with such pitiful equipment. So, when you see people out with, foam axes or whatever whacking on each other, saying they're doing armored combat or studying armored techniques, just turn off that video. Click off that channel. Don't ever watch it again because they're a complete waste of your time. And with that, I thank you all for joining us tonight, and I thank you, Aaron Beatty, for doing the technical end of things. And I would, for those of you that haven't heard already, Aaron Bollerino's wife, Carol McClary, gave birth to a beautiful girl on Saturday morning, and their lives are going to change forever. So, unfortunately, you guys are stuck with me as a commentator until we get through this material. So, I know that Aaron Bollerino wanted to go on to Vaudi afterwards. I'm open to either Vaudi or RAMS 133 Sword and Buckler. Either one of those topics are within my wheelhouse, and so you as the audience will decide where we're going to go with that. All right, but we've still got lots to go. We've got the poleaxe, the lance, and then the equestrian section, which is really very, very interesting. I believe that Bruce Hearns is quite a horseman, or at least has access to riding regularly. So hopefully he'll come out on Monday nights and share his expertise with that. I'm a fair rider, but I won't pretend that I'm an expert by any stretch of the imagination. So thank you all. Have a great night.
Okay. Good night, everyone. And we'll see
Thanks a
you
lot,
again
Caleb. Thanks, Aaron.
next
Nice
week.
job. Thank you.
Thank you for the insight.
Very quick question: which
Sure.
channel did you say was a waste of time?
Anybody that's playing at Armour with padded weapons.
Okay, all right, good.
Yeah.